As we near the final episode of Solo Leveling Season 2, there's a few loose ends that need to be tied up first. There's a bit more to be said with regards to how the Ant King became the king, one final cutscene properly tying up Goto's storyline, then that extra stuff with the serial killer I mentioned a few episodes ago. The latter doesn't really add much to the story, but the former two definitely make these last couple of episodes more engaging, I would say. Like, the full extent of Goto as a character wasn't entirely conveyed, and understanding the Ant King's purpose makes his fight with Sung all the more enjoyable. So here's an extra episode of cut content to complement these last few episodes. But first, it was only a few months ago I showed you guys the coolest Frieren PC to ever hit the market, and now my friends over at Starforge Systems are releasing this. That's right. For those who fell in love with Kaiju No. 8 last year, Starforge Systems has sponsored this video to show you their brand new officially licensed build with it. So, whether you want to rehouse your PC in this stunning case they've designed, or get a brand new build featuring top-of-the-line components, the Kaiju aesthetic will be their front and center. It's not just a sticker or vinyl wrap either, but rather an unpeelable UV print printed directly onto the case itself. Of course, the part of all Starforge builds I personally like the most are these interchangeable plate lights allowing you to modify the aesthetic easily. Not a fan of this particular Kaiju image? Swap out to another with a simple push and pull. So you can either get this as a case by itself, or purchase the pre-built bundle complete with a desk mat and acrylic wall art too. It's all covered by a lengthy 2-year warranty and can even be returned free of charge within 30 days if need be. The desk mats, wall arts, and plate lights are all available separately too, so if you're looking for something smaller, there's some really cool accessories. You can check out all this collab has to offer over at starforgepc.com/AniNews. But anyway, let's rewind to 1 year before this Korea-Japan team came to Jeju Island. The Ant Queen was currently going through a crisis since all the lifeforms which previously served as food was now gone. Her colony, which was now several thousand strong, was, as we saw, resorting to cannibalism in order to feed themselves. This left her and her children one option only, and that was to abandon their current home and seek out a new one. The queen knew she needed to establish a new nation filled with new lifeforms to feed on. So, if the domination of this island was her first task, then the expansion of her nation overseas was her next. That's when the queen would remember the powerful invaders who stepped on the island 3 times before, leading her to recall the great number of sacrifices she had to make. Though she managed to repel these invaders, the queen wasn't fond of the losses which came as a result. So it was that thought which made her wonder if her children could survive should they encounter those invaders again. This led her to the conclusion that she needed powerful soldiers to lead her children, confirming the direction that she had in mind for them. Now she knew for sure exactly how she wanted to evolve them. Fast forward to half a year later, and by gathering the magic power the queen herself possessed, along with the nutrients she absorbed from all her meals, the queen was able to give birth to a new life. She had created what she believed was the greatest weapon she could come up with, one specifically designed to deal with any strong humans it came across. So, it was the queen's determination to create this soldier, combined with its original order of killing all humans it clearly heard in its head, that created the monster which would eventually become the Ant King. It was a terrifying creature born with the iconic skill we all know as gluttony. So, just as how it works in Tensura, by consuming its opponents, this super ant could turn the magic energy and knowledge of those it feeds on into its own. It was a power it came to understand very quickly, and as a result began devouring a lot of its fellow ants. The queen had no problem with such an act taking place, since with its goal and hers being very much aligned, the queen was totally fine sacrificing a few to save the many. So, as this new ant grew stronger day after day, it didn't take long for it to exceed her own power. The queen's other children would also grow into the army she envisioned, and soon enough she knew they'd be ready for that expansion mission. It was before their ranks could be completed though that the human invaders would step foot on her island again. Sure, this time it was a smaller force than usual, but now they were significantly stronger than the last time they came. This was a move the queen could only laugh at though, since to her this new arrival was the perfect opportunity to test the powers of him. She wouldn't just unleash her newly evolved army, but also the super ant she had created to lead them. Now, it wasn't very surprising this super ant would complete his first mission as easily as expected, but what was the fact that by the time he had returned, the queen had already been defeated by another group of invaders. It was in that moment that the Super Ant only felt anger, leading him to express said anger on the convenient punching bags that just so happened to be right next to him. He would then kill the self-proclaimed king of the humans, systematically annihilate all of its subordinates, then devour their heads until it would gain the ability to reason. It was once it had gained this ability to think that this Super Ant began to question its very sense of self. It's unclear whether that message of kill all humans could still be heard, but at the very least it now had a higher level of sentience. So, where before this ant was just a soldier of the queen, now it knew it needed a new identity. The queen was dead and he alone believed himself capable of leading the queendom's remaining soldiers. It was when the Super Ant thought about it like that only one word came to his mind which could describe it. To him, the only title befitting him was king. This wasn't an empty, self-proclaimed title either, as not only did this king have an army which would heed its every order, it also killed the supposed king of the enemies he was up against. So if that wasn't enough to satisfy the requirements to become a king, then the Ant King had no problem proving it other ways. He had zero doubt this title was his alone, and to prove it, he was happy to accept any attempts which would challenge that. Funnily enough, it was shortly after that the Ant King would detect a power far greater than any he'd detected before. Out coming from where his queen was slain was a fierce wave of aura emanating directly from it. It was a level of power this king knew could very well threaten himself. So, as the Ant King thought carefully about who it was this calamitous feeling was coming from, he would venture forward fully intent on challenging another king. He knew whatever he was detecting was clearly not the aura of some regular foot soldier. Now, this isn't the video to talk about the battle which came next, so I'm instead going to focus on what happened with Goto. You see, yes, he was killed as quickly as we saw in the anime, but the shock factor of such an outcome was significantly greater in the manhwa. The reason why that is because until now, Goto was supposed to be built up to be super powerful. Like, back at the airport he described himself as equal to China's #1 hunter Liu, then in the meeting with Chairman Go, we find out his true intention for the raid was to become a national level hunter. This implies his power is already up there with the national level hunters, which for context is leagues above what S ranks are now. In fact, there's a possibility that a couple national level hunters are currently stronger than Sung. So, this entire time we're led to believe Goto is at that level too, up until two very specific moments. The first is during his fight with Sung, where at the end we're shown Sung instilled the fear of death into him. If Goto truly was at the national level, then the fight here would have been a lot more even. There is the chance Sung at this point is stronger than the national level though, so as a reader it's not unlikely to consider this an exception. Where our expectations for Goto are completely reset are here in a cutscene involving the comments of this captain. You see, this is a high-ranking officer within the Chinese Navy. He's currently captaining one of the ships right outside the waters of Jeju Island, watching closely the raid going on with Japan and Korea. For someone as experienced as him, he knew right away why it was Japan was participating in this raid. It was abundantly clear that Japan wanted to make Goto a national level hunter, a title which required the completion of an S-rank gate. This was a goal the captain knew Goto could never achieve, since even if he did complete the gate, the captain stated Goto's power still wouldn't even be close to Liu's. As much as Goto wanted to think he was, and as much as the manhwa and novel tried to portray it as such, it's here we find out Goto doesn't even come close to a national level hunter. So this narrative in which Goto constantly touted himself as being uber strong was now being dismantled by someone who knew the power of a true national level hunter. As someone who's seen their power firsthand, it was clear as day to the captain that Goto still had a long way to go. So, this is a scene I found to be pretty impactful since it directly precedes Goto's fight with the Ant King. Here we would have thought Goto would at least give the Ant King a run for his money, but with the captain resetting our expectations for him, it makes us so much more uncertain about it. We start to think maybe he wasn't as powerful as we initially thought. Combine that with the ominous fact Japan's S ranks were dropping like flies, and what you get is the straight-up execution of Goto at the hands of the Ant King. It's a shocking outcome considering all we were led to believe before it. Now, if you're wondering why Goto called himself the king in the first place, well, that was an answer that stemmed from Japan's true plans for Korea. If you watched this extra cut content here, you'd know in the novel Matsumoto intended to build an empire. He planned to eliminate Korea's S-ranks via the Jeju Island raid, then intended to move in with his own and take this weakened Korea over. It was the first step towards building a massive empire for himself. Goto was Matsumoto's right-hand man, and as the powerful leader spearheading Matsumoto's efforts, Goto fully believed himself to be the only viable person to assume Matsumoto's throne. So when the Ant King came asking if he was the king, Goto's hubris couldn't help but agree with him. What happened next was the same mistake Goto made just a few days ago, since what he assumed was the Ant King's full power was actually just the smallest tip of the iceberg. The moment Goto revealed he was the king, the Ant King went to unleash its true power. It had unveiled an aura Goto had only sensed once before. It was an aura of death he unfortunately wouldn't be so lucky as to evade this time. I personally found it strange the anime decided to make that connection, since everything which would have given context to it wasn't included at all. We never got to see that feeling of death from his fight with Sung, and we definitely didn't see him struggle with the trauma of it after. So for the anime to show that feeling yet not have any context before it, well, it kinda cheapens the reveal that this ant from Goto's perspective is as powerful as Sung. Either way, this was one of the many points reiterating the fact the Ant King and Sung were very much alike. Cha stated it herself last episode, mentioning how fighting the ant would be like fighting Sung. So with Goto reaffirming that notion too, it creates the idea that Sung versus the Ant King is almost like Sung fighting himself. Now, there were a couple scenes left out regarding Sung before the raid, but considering how it deals with his guild and the operations within said guild, it's likely to be in the first few episodes of Season 3. They're not that big of a deal to know right now, but for the purists out there, feel free to skip ahead to here. That's where I'll start talking about the whole left-out serial killer plotline. I won't go too deep into what happened with Sung and Jinho here, but essentially Jinho had found an office for Sung to operate his guild out of. It was a massive space that went against what Sung had in mind because both were operating under two completely different assumptions. Where Jinho believed Sung wanted a guild that could eventually surpass the White Tiger Guild, Sung really just wanted the two of them. He hadn't yet told Jinho he wasn't going to recruit anyone. He decided not to tell him now either, since with all the work Jinho was putting in, it would probably break his heart to hear it. So, out of consideration for Jinho and all his efforts, Sung agreed to let him sign the lease despite knowing such a big space would go mostly unused. It's not like he couldn't afford it, and if it meant Jinho could live his dreams for just a little longer, then Sung was fine to go along with that. The one thing Sung did need to consider properly though was the mandatory third member every guild needed. Since he was the guildmaster and Jinho the vice guildmaster, that meant they needed at least one employee. It was a rule likely set in place to align with the minimum raid team requirements of 3. So, as Sung considered who it was that could fill this position, he was surprised to find every person who came to mind was a woman. Since the condition was a hunter who didn't actually want to work as a hunter, there were a couple he knew that could actually fill the vacancy quite nicely. It was before Sung would make that decision though that Jinho would also mention how a certain foreigner was looking for him. We don't know who it is or what they wanted, but what we do know is that they spoke English. It was a peculiar bit of news to say the least, since to try and contact him through Jinho was a move that required quite a lot of research. It's not like Jinho and Sung were publicly associated, so to know they could get to Sung through him was, well, very thorough of them. Thorough enough to garner Sung's interest. It was after this that Sung would get a ping from one of his shadows, bringing us to his encounter with the serial killer. If you remember how I mentioned in one of my previous videos, a killer on the loose was actually one of the reasons Sung instituted a neighborhood watch in the first place. His neighborhood was dark and had a lot of secluded alleyways, so it really wasn't the safest environment for Jinna to walk home at night in. So, just as Sung had suspected, it wasn't long before a young college student was about to fall prey to that killer. The novel actually presents the encounter from her perspective, starting with the uncomfortable moments when she first realized she was being followed. A short game of cat and mouse would then proceed after, then when the killer eventually decided to make his move, he would pull a knife then force the girl into one of those secluded alleyways I was talking about. Here there were no cameras at all, which was the core reason the killer preferred this neighborhood so much. The risk presented to him was for the most part minimal. At least that was until Sung's patrol came around. So, it was right as the killer was about to strike that Sung would catch his knife barehanded. The lack of blood should have been enough to show the killer the type of person he was dealing with, but for some reason that conclusion just evaded him. He'd even tried to pull the knife away with all his might, but despite the knife not budging at all, the killer somehow just didn't get it. He would simply abandon the knife, then run to the vacant lot that he normally used as his killing ground. It was here the killer would launch a successful sneak attack, not because Sung was caught off guard, but rather because Sung didn't see the need to dodge it. So, what the killer thought was a direct hit to Sung's chest, instead turned out to be yet another absurd display of physical durability. Now, had the killer been able to sense magical energy, then he would have known why his weapons didn't do anything. Once again though, the word hunter completely evaded him. It was then that Sung would ask why the killer was doing this, simply out of curiosity to know his motivations. It was a question that went to change the killer's perception of him, since where before he believed Sung to be this weird vigilante patrolling the streets, now he was getting the feeling that perhaps he was someone just like him. He began to think perhaps Sung was a madman with whom he might be able to form some type of understanding with. So, in a wild gamble that aligned with his thoughts, the killer decided to answer Sung's question honestly. He said the reason he did what he did was because it was fun. He couldn't explain why beyond that, but what he did know was that for some reason whenever he saw someone weaker than himself, he just wanted to go and torment them. That was all Sung needed to hear, as before the killer could go on to say any more, Sung would slice open the tendons on both his legs. Though he felt he could somewhat relate to what the killer was saying, that didn't stop him from dishing out retribution. So, with the killer immobilized and going nowhere, Sung would take his phone, call 911, then tell the killer to hand himself in by midnight. Should he choose not to, then the orc placed in his shadow was ordered to kill him. Sung honestly wasn't sure whether the orc could be that patient, but he hoped the killer would live so that he could at least repent for his sins for the rest of his life. Sung would then leave completely satisfied, not because he saved a girl from being killed, but rather because Shadow Exchange had showed its effectiveness yet again. The skill was proving its convenience more and more every time he used it. It was the most Sung Jinwoo response that you could get from a situation like this. But yeah, that's pretty much it for all the extra stuff I missed. You can expect the next episode soon, so if you want to see that, then be sure to subscribe. Now, before I go, don't forget to check out the Starforge Systems Kaiju No. 8 collab. Not only does this limited time PC look absolutely incredible, but you can also get the desk mats and wall arts completely separate too. So, if you're a fan of the series and want to enhance your gaming setup with it, then check out what's available at starforgepc.com/AnnieNews. A huge thanks to them again for sponsoring this video. Until next time though, ciao!